context, from investing and working in an open source project to the setting up the establishment of an industry consortium, and why we believe that this is necessary, and what's the process and what's the result. So as an outline, one of the statements is that open source is necessary but not sufficient to have large-scale deployment in the industry. The role of the consortium, what we did in the Papyrus-IC, as I said, and future challenges in summary. So this picture is not new, right? If software is eating the world, open source is eating the software world. And there are a number of factors. I mean, there could be a whole presentation leading essentially to that conclusion, and we've done it in the past in different contexts through keynotes and so on, which is that the only way we believe, if we look at the different factors in today's industry with the third-party software tool suppliers decreasing their investment in tooling as opposed to the 90s, if we look at the constraints we've been going through, the number of factors that lead us to open source, and now we can say that the success we had with open source technology over the years is a no-brainer. With the pressure we can see in companies like Ericsson, but all companies, to reduce budget related to licenses, budget related to a number of things, then we're getting to the conclusion, or we're getting to the point where open source is the preferred alternative. And in some cases, and that's the part here that is highlighted in red, is that even if some tools are not quite at the level of industrial tools, of third-party proprietary commercial tools, we would prefer to go open source because we believe that one day or another we have to bite the bullet, and the only way to do it is to get involved. So, as I said, open source is a necessary condition. And for us, if we look in the context of modeling, we decided that we wanted to work with Eclipse and we wanted to work with UML. So those were essentially preconditions that were stated by the teams in Ericsson who have been working with modeling at a large scale. I mean, we often hear things like code generation only works in academic cases or in small cases, but everybody who's making cell phone calls, your calls are being, Ericsson holds about 50% of the mobile network infrastructure, and all of the calls that are made, the radio-based station controller, are actually developed with modeling, and the code is generated, right? So it works at a very large scale. But the fact is, people had stated that yes, we want to use UML for a number of reasons, and that's not the purpose of this call. But now one thing that we want to get rid of is no vendor lock-in, ability to independently develop required capabilities, because in many cases, our engineers know as well or even better than the third-party tool suppliers, developers, what the functionalities are. And if we don't work in open source, then we cannot directly contribute to it. Also, one thing that is very important is the possibility to use the same tool both for industrial development and research. And here I don't necessarily mean people in research sitting in research offices or in research institutes. It could even be groups at Ericsson that are conducting research. But if we don't work in open source technology, it's just impossible to use the same tools. And we hit that again and again and again. There's a concrete example where to develop, for example, hybrid textual graphical modeling, we were doing it for one of the proprietary commercial tools that we're using, and develop a prototype and do the work, but at the end we could not integrate it because it was violating IP issues. So we need open technologies. We need to reduce, to simplify the legal and the business aspects if we want to do things. If one supplier cannot do it for us, then we can ask someone else who has the ability, because no single supplier or company in the world can do everything. And last and probably most important is that it really enables fruitful collaboration and technology transfer. Again, that's not the purpose of that call, of that talk, sorry, but that's a very important aspect that I would be happy to talk about. I was giving a keynote a couple of weeks ago at the SAM conference at Models, and that was one of the main purpose of that presentation. So ultimately, in our case, in terms of open source, what we've done is invested in Papyrus and related technologies, and that's not only Papyrus as a modeling tool, but it's also including a number of different underlying technologies like EMF compare as a base for doing the model diff merge. That also includes, a lot of work in OCL to check the constraints. We're using XTEX. So all of this together is providing the basis under which we're working. So, but open source also gave us, and it proven to be the right direction. When some people at Ericsson, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, decided that in order to put in place certain development process, they wanted to go with open source. That was for a use case we have for operation and maintenance, people essentially modeling the APIs, the interfaces, and being able to generate different type of artifacts. They've decided that, yeah, Papyrus, well, open source, and then selected Papyrus as the way to go. 5 years after, and we had the talk about that, I think it was last year, it's proven that we could do it, and we did it. In addition to it, there are a number of things that we've always wanted to improve in tooling that we've been able to do. So diff merge, for example, model diff merge is being done based on EMF compare, but there's, EMF compare by itself is not sufficient, because if you're working at the UML level and you do a diff merge and it gives you the diff merge at the EMF level, may not tell much to the user. So you need to bring the diff merge at the level of the language. And even if you could do it at the UML level, since more or less everything is a DSL, then you need to be able to work the diff merge at the level at which the users are working. Integration with Git, that's a type of thing that we wanted to do in Ericsson like 4 or 5 years ago, and the third-party suppliers we were using at the time says, no, it's technically impossible to do it. Of course, it turns out to be false, but now we've been able to do it. DSL and customization is one of the key things that the modeling tools in general have been suffering from, not providing first-class support like the UML tools for customization in DSLs. We have very advanced technology there now. Hybrid textual graphical modeling, which is a thing that people have been asking for a long time. And yes, there are solutions. If you work with different technology and better and other things, you can have both, but you never have both with first-class citizens or first-class solutions for both textual and graphical. And in our case, it's important to have both. So, there's no point of debating which one is the best, textual or graphical. I think both are needed for different contexts. Sometimes it's the same person playing 2 different roles that would use either, one or the other. Or sometimes it's a matter of the preference of a person. Some people prefer to use textual and some people prefer to use graphical. Why can't we have both, right? The runtime, for people who don't know, the runtime that exists in tools like Rhapsody and RSA-RTE today are runtimes who were developed in the 90s. The one exists in RSA-RTE today was developed in 97, 98. Right? So it's a good runtime, but how many generations of hardware did we have since 97, 98? Right? But if we don't control the runtimes, and if it's IP protected, then we cannot do the work we need. So all of these reasons have brought us to, to choose open source, and the last 5 years have proven that yes, that was the right thing to do, even if in the meantime we didn't get in those open source tools in Papyrus the level of maturity we have in the commercial proprietary tools we're using. But with time, we're getting to it in the different use cases, in the different contexts, and now we're deploying it at a large scale. But open source is not sufficient, right? If we just take open source projects, right, there are a number of things that open source projects don't give you. They don't give you industrial product management. Like typical open source projects are led by technical people for technical people. There's no real product roadmap. You have project roadmaps, but there's a difference between a project roadmap and a product roadmap. If you're a large corporation and you say, we're going to go and move from tool X that we're using today to this tool in open source, like company like Saab or a company like Airbus or a company like Ericsson, you need to make sure that there's actually a roadmap that is well maintained. It's very difficult to achieve industrialness in terms of quality, in terms of usability, in terms of stability. Because typically, the people who are developing the open source projects are not end users. Of course, we have exceptions to this. If we take CDT, I mean, we have those bootstrapping cases where people developing CDTs are using of CDTs, but those are some cases. But if we think of development tools in general, where we need to deploy, and one of the things that modeling tools have been suffering from in the last 20 years is actually usability. If modeling tools, and modeling tools are not only used for coding related aspects, they can be used for system engineers. And guess what? System engineers and software engineers are different. So if you get system engineering tools that are developed by software people, they don't speak the same language. They won't develop with the same priorities in mind. And the tools that are developed need to be tested in the large context of the end users. And the long-term commitment is always an issue. I was talking to some people from the European Commission, and it says like open source is the only solution and blah, blah, and the person says, yeah, we hear you, but it's not sufficient. So you don't know how many open source projects we have on GitHub that are not used at all. Like essentially they've been developed and people ask for funding at the European Commission, and now there's this magic buzzword that you can say, and it will be open source. So it's like by magic, if it's open source, then it will have impact everywhere. Not quite. From an industrial point of view, what's needed is we need proper governance. If you take a company like Ericsson that has 2,000, like roughly 2,000 users of modeling tools, and you're going to move these people over time to an open source tool, you need to make sure that it's well governed. If someone is raising a bug somewhere, how will this bug be addressed? Right? What type of governance is there to guide the direction of the tool? So industrial product and project management, product roadmap, how do we manage requirements over time? How will this tool evolve? As end users, what trust do we have that the tool is evolving in a direction that satisfies or that fits what we're doing or what we want to do? The long-term availability and evolution, and things like joint development financing, commercial support, but also there needs to be marketing. Because the reality is, a beautiful project in which you're investing can actually turn into something that is fairly negative, right? And if you invest like millions of dollars into something, and then 5 years after, you may get a very good technology, but that's not better. So whether a technology is open source or commercial, if there is no community using this technology, it will be dead, right? No matter. There are probably more dead open source projects than there are commercial projects, right? So it's not, open source is by no means sufficient. Actually, I take no credibility for that slide. It's actually from Jordi Cabot, who's giving a keynote, and I had to steal it because that's really what it is, right? You need to nurture, you need to do something. So, as I said, what we need to do now is to really grow a real community, ecosystem. So we need many companies involved from the user side. We need people in research and academia, because ultimately a lot of, not all, right? We're no longer in this triangle where innovation starts from, so there is this, I could have used this slide as well, where you see the conventional tech transfer or research triangle, where the needs are actually identified at the end user location, like typically the industrial users. And this is fed into research and academia. And research and academia develop the things, and they transfer the technology through a small, medium enterprise, and then it goes back to the large players, right? Yeah, that's pretty good. But you're dependent on few. If this SME that you've chosen to do the tech transfer with decides that there's no longer a business case for them to continue to do that, your technology is dead as well. And we have, again, a list, like a long list of examples there. So what we want is to remove those predefined workflows and say, well, wait a minute, we're all in it together. So why don't we put this technology right at the middle and everybody can actually contribute to it. But at the end of the day, if we want to grow a real community, we have to make sure that if we believe that each of the participants there is required, like without end users, there will not be the economy to actually make it work. Without research and academia, we're going to lose a lot. I mean, we're going to lose a lot of innovations. I mean, one of the things we're facing today is that the modeling tools we're using are more or less the same in terms of capabilities than what we were using 20 years ago. Okay? I can say more or less. There are things that we had in the 90s we don't have today that we should have. So things that have disappeared. And some things that, yes, are a bit better, but more or less we have the same thing. But also education. I mean, look at how companies like MathWorks have become successful. They were smart enough to seed into the universities. I was on a panel on UX at models, and people were saying, you know, one person stated how great usability UX MathWorks has, Simulink. And she's right. Talk to any people using Simulink, they will say, yeah, I mean, they like using it. Okay, but Simulink doesn't even have diff merge, model diff merge. If I'm trying to, as a product manager, to bring any type of modeling tools in Ericsson that doesn't have diff merge, I mean, it will stop after 5 seconds, right? So why is it that in one case it's acceptable and people don't complain about it? The culture. It's very important. Like, we have to work right from day one with the students. So research and academia have a very important role to play. But the other thing is open source doesn't mean a free ride. And if, as end users, we're not taking care of suppliers, it won't work either. Because we need the suppliers to bring industrialness to the productization, to have commercial offerings. Many companies, as end user companies, are willing to use open source, but they need to have also access to commercial solutions. They need to be able to buy open source. So the main challenge is really in development of the community. And the coding and the community aspect is really like the yin and yang. And that's also, I have to give credit to, for this analogy to Georgie Cabot. It needs to be, as I said, end user driven. We need strong leadership from the end user companies because at the end of the day, the tools are developed to be used by the end users. But we need very strong supplier ecosystem, and we need to make sure that they're financially successful. We don't want to starve them, otherwise we'll get nothing. We need to attract the leaders from the research industry, from the research community. I mean, lead researchers have done extremely good research in modeling, but that's true for most of the aspect in software engineering. And yet we have little transfer. I mean, the conclusion that we're getting to with respect to the modeling tools to say that we have more or less what we had 20 years ago applies to essentially more or less all of the different aspects of software development. We need to establish Papyrus in this case as a lead modeling tool, as a lead tool for model-based engineering training and education. We need to grow the number of committers and contributors, like the bus factor is very important. I mean, if 2 people are disappearing from one of the lead companies developing this, are we gonna die? Like, is it true that like large corporations will start investing in the development of open source technologies, and because one of the suppliers is losing their 2 key resources, we're going to be left with nothing? We have to make sure that we reduce the bust factor. And foster contributions from all participants. Contributions to an open source community is not only about committing code, it's about documentation, it's about examples, it's about usage, it's about testing, it's about a number of things. And these things need to be valued. And overall, it means that we need to have a clear governance. How do we want to manage this community? So as a response to that, by the way, when I joined Ericsson 3.5 years ago, I met with the people. My responsibility in software development was to take care of the modeling tools and ask them. I said, okay, how do you see what I need to do? What do you think are the priorities? And people says, yes, obviously we need to bring the open source tools to maturity, but as importantly, we need to develop the community. Because as I said, whether you have a commercial tool or an open source tool, if you have no community, the tool is dead. And companies like Ericsson have experienced it again and again. And when we talk to other partners, they say exactly the same thing. So sorry, this one is. So what we've done is we've founded the Papyrus Industry Consortium together with Airbus Helicopters and Saab. And as a group of lead suppliers, CA List, Eclipse Source, OneFact, and Zilixsoft, and other members in the last year. And this is growing, by the way. This was the initial team of companies. In terms of the mission and vision, what it does, it's to develop customizable and extensible industrial grade open source model-based engineering tool suite based on Papyrus and Eclipse platform, but also other technologies. Who we're doing it for, it's really the broad scope. I mean, it's essentially people using modeling tools. So it goes from enterprise software, but to Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems. So Internet of Things here is not used just as a buzzword. Yes, it is a buzzword, but it is the term that is bringing us essentially all in the same boat. Whether we're telecom, whether we talk with the car industry people, we're all facing, or defense and aerospace, we're all facing the same issues. And how we're doing it, it's really by fostering and leveraging collaborations. This is absolutely key between the three participants' roles that I talked about: end user, suppliers, and research and academia. So the overall goals are pretty broad. There's 8 main goals here. The first one is all about governance, developing the industrial open grade solution. Joint financing, because if we want this, it's not dollar matching, but if we invest $100,000 in something and someone has $10,000 to put, we're better with 110 than we are with 100. So, and people contribute in different ways. Knowledge sharing, we're more or less all facing the same issues, so why don't we share? Promotion of open source solutions and development of the community. Standardizations, so we're working a lot with the standard organizations, by the way, like the TM Forum and the standard definition organizations who need tooling to develop their standards, but also we want to use the UML standards and all of the standards and contribute to them. Collaboration with research and contributions to model-based engineering education and training. In terms of the key challenges, the first one is the key one. It's company culture. Moving to open source is not something simple at many different levels in companies. Development of the community, it requires a lot of effort, and it's over time that people give credibility to what you're doing. And you have, again, the 3 legs, right? You have to attract key end users to bring leadership. You have to work with the suppliers, so we have to make sure suppliers would only come if there's a business in it for them. And need to make sure that they believe in it enough so that they come. And research and academia, if they know that there's a community, then you would be able to attract the people. But then you need to manage them. You cannot only promise, you have to deliver. Product management and governance, that's not simple. I mean, it's something that needs to be done and properly done and successful. And in the case of Papyrus specifically, it's to manage the development of different versions with customizations and DSLs and make sure that we don't end up with a bunch of unrelated solutions, right? But you need to manage it as a product line to ensure the long-term evolution and be able to benefit from the different innovations. So ultimately, it's neither free or a silver bullet. So it's not true that you just use the buzzword and keyword of open source and then all of your problems are resolved. There are a lot of issues we have to deal with, but the one thing we know is then we can be in control and we can work with the suppliers. It needs different type of work. You cannot just commend. You need to lead, which is quite different, but it's much more fun if you want my opinion. In summary, You know, we've been using modeling tools at Ericsson for over, I mean, when I say we, I was not there 20 years ago, so I can say Ericsson has been using modeling tools for the last 20 years in a very successful manner, but proprietary tools have always been a main issue. A lot of benefits. I'm not saying that, you know, you don't get benefits from proprietary tools. I think the 90s in particular, it was very vibrant, and there was a lot of excitement and promise and very good technologies. But then when we moved to the 2000s, then when we had the business consolidations and so on, there were much less emphasis on features and capabilities, and then we started to see the decrease in the value that was provided. And now it's the time for end user companies to take over their destiny. Open source tools are needed but not sufficient, as I said, by themselves. A vibrant and extensive user-driven community is required. And that's why we developed the industry consortium. And as I said, it can only work if everybody's working together. So I'm chairing the Papyrus Industry Consortium, but the work that is represented here is actually the result of the collaborative efforts with the companies like Saab and Airbus Helicopters and Airbus Defence and Space and CEA and Zelixoff and all of the members that you saw there. Right now, I can say it has been a fairly hard work journey, but lots of fun, and we're really seeing now the results of it as we're seeing the excitement in different places. And we're currently working, since the Papyrus IC is within Polarsys in a work group in Eclipse. We're now working to use the experience learned in doing it to revisit the vision and mission of Polarsys, and also to try to help others like Thales, people who would like to bring Capella into potentially an industry consortium to facilitate that. And that's really what we need to do. I was thinking I know this voice. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay.
Okay, thank you. If people have any questions or want to have any discussions, then I'll be available.